myself to be careful about the promises I make at the end of book clubs because the next week seems so far away, and it really isn't. I don't know what it is. Wouldn't that money be much better used doing other things? And it's been interesting because Bezos has said that like getting to space is the most important thing that he's doing right now, more important
Yeah.
than Amazon.
Alex, do you like Ian's
Uh,
background? Yeah, I like it.
And
oh,
I'm hearing feedback.
Yeah, sorry, that was my
is
bad.
that our YouTube?
That was,
Oh,
that,
yeah.
was that was last week's YouTube. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So,
Okay. You are
Ian, happy birthday, by the way.
Happy
Thank you very
birthday,
much.
Ian!
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
Ian, is there a way to mute everyone?
Yes, I'm going to
I
do
just
that.
asked you to do that now. Yeah, cool.
Okay.
All right, great.
All right, Alex, you're unmuted. And
Okay. Except for,
Orchid,
yeah.
there you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining for this week's session of Always Day One Book Club. We will be covering Facebook. And Alex, you've changed up your look, which is exciting. And it's Ian's birthday. So this is going to be like a really, really fun hour. So Alex, let me kick it over to you because you asked a couple of questions at the end of last week's sessions in terms of like things to think about. As we're
That's
reading
right.
this chapter and how to apply it back to our companies. So do you want to go through those again? And then, format is the same as previous weeks. Ian and I will do a couple of Q&As and a guided discussion at the beginning. And then of course, we'll open it up to Q&A. So as we're going, please feel free to submit your questions to the group chat. And then probably at about 8:30 or so, we'll start calling on people. All right, sounds good?
Perfect. Oh, I should start. So I think that like today will be a discussion that largely centers around feedback. We can get to the point of feedback inside Facebook, but one thing that I think would be worth thinking about for everybody out there is how feedback works inside your organization, how it can be improved. If you and also like I would say right now as we get going, one thing that's worth keeping in mind is what do you think the purpose, if feedback even exists in your company, what is the purpose of that feedback? Is it to keep people in their place or to make sure that a project is online? Like, why do people give feedback inside your organization? And maybe let's see if we can sort of change your opinion about what it should be about by the time we get through this discussion. So when we open it up to questions, that'll be something that's worth that I'm really actually eager to hear from everyone in terms of, or everyone that's comfortable in terms of the way feedback works in your company.
All right, sounds good. So we'll kick it off. The first question is, going through the chapter, it's you kind of have to remind yourself that Mark Zuckerberg has only ever worked for himself and he's never been in a company setting. So my first question is like, where do you think his openness to feedback comes from?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that one of the things about Zuckerberg is that because he had never worked in another company, he had to learn about running a company from people who had. So he would never really had the luxury of knowing what to do or having seen other people demonstrating a model. Like for him, the only way to learn how to run a company was asking for feedback from people who had that experience. He didn't just figure out how to run Facebook on his own. There were many mentors that he had along the way that have helped him figure out exactly what to do. And of course, like some of that involves bringing in higher skilled or more experienced people inside the company. Sheryl Sandberg is one name that comes to mind. But the other way to do it is, you go out and you ask people who have run businesses. And, one of my favorite interviews from the book takes place in the Facebook chapter, which is with Don Graham. And Graham used to be the owner of the Washington Post. And he got introduced to Zuckerberg really early on. And Zuckerberg said, "Hey, Don, I'd like to shadow you as you run the Post for a while." And Graham told him that's ridiculous. Like the newspaper with our printing press and everything we do in that sense runs completely different from a social network. And I don't think you'll actually get anything out of it. And then Zuckerberg persisted. He said, no, I want to do this. And ended up spending 3 days following Don Graham. And I asked him, I was like, Don, was that weird for you? How did Zuckerberg behave? And he's like, no, it was fine. Like no one knew who he was because he had just started Facebook. And he was very eager to learn about all the processes inside the newspaper operation and watching how the press ran. And he also said that a newsroom was not so different from the way that Facebook works in terms of like philosophy and culture. He's like, these are both, people who have a bigger belief in what they were doing outside of just making cash, like for Facebook. Zuckerberg had this belief in making, connecting the world. Some might also say he had a belief in increasing his own power. And a newsroom is also this belief in telling the story. And both serve like both are editors. Zuckerberg is an editor. Newspaper is a filter in terms of information. So there were parallels there. And so Graham is one of the mentors that he had. And I'll just tell one quick story before we go to the next question. It's in the book, so if people have read it, I'm sorry, but it's one of my favorite ones to tell. First, no, I'm thrilled if you actually read it. What am I saying? But so Zuckerberg, so on the phone, and Graham goes, so a couple of years later, Zuckerberg asked me to introduce him to Jeff Bezos, and he had already, he was going to eventually sell the Washington Post to Bezos, and he wanted Bezos to, Zuckerberg wanted to shadow Bezos the same way that he shadowed Graham. So Graham sends the inquiry in, and then Bezos replies back, and he goes, "Listen, Don," he's like, "it's a nice idea, but the only thing that would be more distracting than having Mark Zuckerberg follow me around all day would be having Angelina Jolie here in Amazon offices doing that." So he's like, "Sorry, but it's not going to happen." And actually, I did speak to Zuckerberg about this. I was like, "Yeah, Don Graham had some interesting things to say. What happened? Bezos didn't let you follow?" And Zuckerberg seemed like objectively a little dejected. He goes, "Yeah, he didn't let me." So I thought that was interesting. So yeah, I think Zuckerberg, I think it's fraught whether he does a good job listening to advice from the outside, but when it comes to listening to advice and feedback from the inside and from the people in his trusted circle, he's very good at it, actually, which comes to a surprise to a lot of people. And I think that's been a major factor behind Facebook's success.
It's kind of interesting when you're telling the story about like why feedback is so important at Facebook. One of the things that jumped out at me was the fact that they adapted a program that already existed from a company called Vital Smarts. Do you have any like background as to like how they chose, like, of all the feedback programs in the world, like what like why that one? I was curious.
I didn't get into so yes, it's a good question. Vital Smarts, they do this crucial conversations training, and Facebook has adapted that for Facebook. I don't know exactly why it was that one, but it makes a lot of sense. It's like maybe people in the group can educate me a little bit more about nonviolent communication, but that's what it really seems like. Mm-hmm. The idea is you want to go and have a conversation with someone in a way that doesn't put them on the spot, in a way that actually makes them, feel comfortable sharing in terms of like, I guess just the things that went wrong. So, I mean, if you go through it, there's 3 parts that are really interesting, and it's a way that you can ask someone for feedback and you won't feel it's not too aggressive. So the first part is fact. You say the fact, and that could be something like, you said that you were going to get this report to me in 2 weeks' time, and now it's 3 weeks. Then you tell the story, right? So you try to take the person and put them in your shoes and tell them a little bit about how you felt. So the story could be, when I didn't get the report, I thought that there was a chance that you didn't really agree with the direction of my project, and therefore didn't really feel compelled to give me the report. And then the last part is the ask. You just say something simple. Can you help me understand? Think about how different that is from where's my report? You owe me this report. Totally different world, because then you can start to get into people's head about it. And I've actually tried it out. It's a pretty good system in terms of trying to figure out what went wrong when there's something you don't like. But more broadly, so last week we talked a little bit about how a 6-pager is a way that anybody inside Amazon can get an idea to a decision maker. And more broadly, what this training does is it makes people on Facebook feel comfortable no matter where they are on the corporate totem pole, the bottom, the middle, or the top, bringing ideas to anybody else. So there's this whole, like, if you're encouraged to give feedback all the time, you're going to feel comfortable bringing your ideas to people. And I think that's important. Like, I think that typically when we have an idea, we never feel comfortable speaking to our skip level manager. And if you're somewhere high up on the totem pole and someone at the very bottom brings you an idea, there's almost always this sort of bias in your head. I'm not really going to listen to them. What do they know? And by going through this process, all like when I went through to the feedback training, there was 12 people, all different levels, all different divisions. You get taught that it doesn't matter who's coming to you with an idea, you can take it seriously. It's part of the company's culture. It's built into the company's fiber. And as I reported on what was going on in Facebook, found out that willingness of anybody to go up to anyone, whether it's a skip level manager or even Zuckerberg himself, has played a big role in helping the company navigate some pretty serious computing shifts that would have done in companies that did not have this appreciation of others' ideas.
Now, you talked about, Mark being much more open to feedback from within the organization than from outside of the organization. And last week we talked about how Amazon has such a tight culture that everybody's kind of a cultural fit within the organization. So, my question is similar in that, do you think that like Facebook employees are a certain way, and just because you're open to feedback from within the organization, maybe you're in effect creating an echo chamber that you didn't intend to?
Yeah, this was the problem ahead of 2016, is that basically every Facebook person was kind of the same. Let me see if I can do a decent job describing them. They were all very smart. They all felt like that perfect kid in elementary school or high school, the one that was good looking and nice and good at sports. And you just, kind of hated because they were good at everything, and that was annoying. And it seems like everybody inside Facebook is like that. They all used to be like that. They all fit that mold. And that sort of allows itself to allow a company filled with the same type of person can end up in a groupthink situation. And that's what happened. They couldn't anticipate their company's products were going to be used for bad, and it sort of fell apart from there. And you had all these manners, all these different ways of exploitation happening inside the company. Okay, fast forward after the 2016 election, after Cambridge Analytica, what do they do to fix it? So this is a system, right? And what matters, so the system matters, of course, but the inputs are super important because they're what drives the system, and they determine the outputs that you get. So Zuckerberg took a look at the company and said, wait a second, we have so many techno-optimists. He admitted this much to Congress. And he's like, if we're going to prevent the situations before, we need to inject adversarial thinkers inside the company. So they started hiring people that just had totally different backgrounds than the people that I've met inside Facebook before, and weren't that built in that mold of that perfect kid in high school. So you had ex-spies, ex-journalists, academics, media buyers who knew how to pressure test Facebook systems. And they tasked them, they put them on these teams. One of them is called the Investigative Operations Team. There's another one called Rapid Response. And they said, your job is to find any problem inside Facebook and bring it to our attention inside the product development phase itself, right? So they wouldn't end up releasing all these products with so many vulnerabilities in them. They would release them with the idea that they had multiple perspectives. The techno-optimists who believe how great the product can be so they can build something that might be used by a lot of people, and the adversarial thinkers who said, we can't anticipate what's going to happen wrong with these products once we build them.
Like one of the interesting aspects of the adversarial thinkers, or the rationale behind that, is when it's used as, for example, like justification for Peter Thiel, like being on the board, right? Like there's a lot of people who aren't Peter Thiel, for example, that regardless of what you think about him, like who could play that role on that board. So like what like they've seemed pretty stubborn about keeping them there. So I'm curious if there was anything that you got out of your conversations around that kind of resoluteness or resolution, like around keeping Peter on that board in spite of kind of a lot of things that have been swirling lately.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's tough to talk about. Like, I don't have a sense about why Peter and not another adversarial thinker.
Right.
But think about, I mean, I'm not going to make a defense for Peter Thiel, but just think about like what he can bring to a board, right? He's definitely an out of the box thinker. He's seen tech. and he's been with Zuckerberg for a long time. So Zuckerberg's probably seeing this pattern and has seen a way that he's helped him think differently. It doesn't mean that Peter Thiel controls the board, but he is a piece in that equation. Is there somebody else that could fill it? Yeah, I'm sure there is. But also, unfortunately, because of the monoculture here in Silicon Valley, it does seem that very, very frequently, where else are you going to look?
That's
just
the thing.
Yeah,
that's the thing. It's like there's like and by the way, it's not just necessarily like the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. I mean, that was Microsoft's issue too for the longest time, right? Where they couldn't get out of like Bellevue, and it's like they couldn't see the world for what it was. Instead, they saw the world from their perspective, which was kind of like Bellevue out. It's that, as a frankly a New Yorker, that's always been like one of the things that's frustrated me about that monoculture, as you called it. And I think that kind of nailed the description.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, as a reporter here, trying to speak with Republicans can be difficult.
Yeah.
I have to make a lot of calls before I get a Republican on the line.
I love the idea of adversarial thinkers. And I'd be curious, like once we open up to Q&A, like if people from other industries are like what they think about it, if they think that could be easily incorporated into their organization. I think that would just be really fascinating. What was my other question? Oh yeah. So to kind of, it's kind of along the same train about like this culture of sameness, obviously something that plagued them, pre-2016. Now, in the chapter, you cover a lot about how AI is the differentiator for Facebook and that without AI, they'd probably be dead in the water, right? Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to AI trainers, it's kind of aligns with the thinking of like people only being optimistic about technology, how they don't think about how the bad actors would use the technology. Mm-hmm. So when you have trainers who tend to be like all the same, you also suffer from like this AI having these like unconscious biases that it like received from its trainer. So did you see in your work if like Facebook is actively trying to diversify the trainers when it comes to their AI and ML programs?
Yeah, that is a great question. So the one thing I'll say about Facebook's training of Facebook in AI, there's not really a lot of room for optimism when it comes to training AI in Facebook, because the most important task they train their AI in is finding, just to put it honestly, like fairly evil posts and finding a way to make sure that they don't end up circulating on the network. So you're talking about things like posts encouraging violence, terrorism, and child porn. And I say in the chapter that Facebook couldn't exist without AI. And it's true, because without the AI that actively filters this stuff out, this content would just spread across the entire platform. And the job of Facebook's executive team would be literally, they already spend a lot of time talking about, bad content on the platform. But literally the job of the team would be like finding ways to address some of the, all these content controversies. Like it happened after Facebook Live when those systems weren't really spun up very well, where there were like murders and suicides that were happening. It seemed like every day, but it was really more like every week on Facebook Live. And so in terms of bringing an adversarial mindset, like the people that are actually important to training these systems are the content moderators who are picking it out and then filtering it out and passing it along to the AI team who build the classifiers. We do have an example a little bit later in the book, in the Leader of the Future chapter, where Amazon had a recruiting algorithm where it ended up having this algorithm that looked for job candidates, and was filtering out women. And, there was a reporter that broke the story, so we got to learn a little bit about it. But obviously that's yes, it's a trainer issue, but it's also the inputs. To get back to the inputs, right? It's there's the data, there's a data issue, which is that the data that the company is bringing in is flawed because it's based off of what exists now. Like, what is an Amazonian? Well, if you look at the numbers, majority male. So that's what the algorithm is going to be trained off of. I don't see that problem as much in Facebook, again, just because of the nature of the content, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like one of the things that I'm hoping to see more of is disclosure from tech companies when it comes to algorithms gone bad. Too many of them say nothing about it. Amazon tried to keep it quiet. The only reason we found out about it is because Reuters broke the story. So I think the point that you bring up is like really important. It's super important to look for bias and look for discrepancies and make sure that the AI, is not living its life as a techno optimist, because that would be bad. But inside Facebook, I don't think it has the luxury to.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, so Amazon is like the always day one company. Facebook is kind of where the We're 1% finished company.
Yeah.
Early on in that chapter, there was an exchange that I assume read as awkwardly as it was, but I'm curious if it was that way. Where you asked Mark, like, what would happen if Facebook stopped inventing? Was his like, how do you read into like kind of his awkwardness or weirdness in answering that question? It seemed like it was as if it was the first time he'd ever been asked that, maybe.
I'm sure it was. Yeah. First of all, I can't stop laughing at Mark making Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue behind your shoulder. It's amazing.
I know. If it's too distracting, let me know.
No. It's appropriate for this discussion. Yeah.
But I feel like he didn't invent that barbecue sauce either, just like he didn't invent your stories, right? So, and I think like one of the things that does come up in the book is the shift from, from invention to, I don't know, let's call it like innovation on top of other people's innovation, right? I mean, it's like TSL.
I think we should call it reinvention. I mean, fine. Yeah. Okay, sorry, I'll let you finish the question.
No, it's fine. Like reinvention, right? Yeah. So is that like kind of how things are going to continue to go for Facebook? Like, are they that big that they can't like create kind of those like paradigm changing innovations in the same way that like people, levy that criticism at Apple right now too, right? Is that they're out there and, they've always been more fast followers than kind of new platform inventors, but is that what Facebook is? And if they can't like invent it, they go out and buy it. Is that the kind of company they are? Because it doesn't always work, right? Because like Oculus, for example, there's jury's still out on that. But I mean, if this wasn't like VR's moment to shine, like right now at a time where we all wish we were somewhere else, like what is it, right? And so I'm curious, like how, like what that vibe is like inside of Facebook.
Oh yeah, great. I'm going to address all these things. So let's start with VR. The reason why VR isn't taking off isn't because of lack of demand. It's because of lack of supply, which is something that a lot of people kind of miss. Facebook can't make the Oculus Quest fast enough, and Zuckerberg just talked about it on the earnings call today, actually. So I think people really are yearning to be in VR, but the production is just not moving as fast as they'd hope. So I do agree the jury's still out, but I'm actually more optimistic on VR than at any point that I've been in the 5 years that I've been reporting here in Silicon Valley. Although this would have been kind of a sweet moment for them to be able to ship that thing, because I don't know. I'd like to get lost in some virtual universe. That sounds amazing.
They could have had like a Nintendo Switch moment, right?
Yeah, that's right. It could have been huge, but apparently it takes time to make these things. So it's okay. So then this interaction between me and Zuckerberg, it was amazing. I was like, so I sat down next to him and I was like, all right, well, in journalism, you generally like to start with kind of like, a fun, weird starter question to get people feeling comfortable with you. And, then you move on to your harder questions, like a hamburger, right? You get the bun, then you get to the meat, another bun. It was great to meet you. Write your story. So I was like, all right, let's just do this, right? And I the answer should have been a slam dunk. So we sat down and I go, okay, Mark, I'm going to start with an easy one. What would happen if Facebook stopped inventing?
You're the guy in the first chapter now who just asked Bezos the question.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm what does day 2 look like, Mark? Yeah, it's right. It's the same thing. What does day 2 look like? And Mark just he looked at me like I was nuts. It's like just basically he tried to answer the question for a bit, immediately turns it on to me. What do you think? And I was like, I don't know. I think Facebook would fall apart. And he goes, yeah, it wouldn't be good. And he goes, I don't know. It's a funny question. It's not something I actually really think about. So this idea of building is super ingrained into Facebook's, Facebook's culture and Zuckerberg's mentality. And actually, like when I got that response, I was like, I fucked up the interview. Like, it's done. Not only have I made Mark upset about me, but I didn't get I had already basically written the chapter. Like, I knew where that quote was going to go. And I just need, like, sometimes when you write a line, you write a story and you just need that one key quote. Like, you generally see that the lead and then the nut paragraph, which tells you everything you need to know about the story. And then the quote, which is the proof to hammer it home. And I had like been to the feedback class. I said, okay, now it's just time for me to say Facebook is the most vulnerable of all companies. If it doesn't keep inventing, it's going to be tough. Put it to Mark. I'm waiting for here, Mark, it's on it. It's down the middle. Just tell me if we didn't invent, we'd fall apart. And it led to this amazing interaction, which I thought was just so funny. Now, in terms of like Facebook's ability to invent, I still believe Facebook is inventive. But I do think that like one thing that gets lost in this discussion of like, is Silicon Valley still innovative, is that sometimes it does take a full reinvention in order to remain relevant. And so that's what Facebook's been going through now. So people say, if you look at stories in a vacuum, it is Facebook stole a product from Snapchat and is now succeeding because of it. It's actually one part of a much bigger transformation, because what stories is a part of is it's a part of Facebook moving from a broadcast network, right? It started out as an online directory, then it transformed to a broadcast network, which is sort of like this one place you could post anything, and all of your friends and acquaintances and your gym teacher from 7th grade, and that aunt that you don't really want to speak to will see it. And then so that sort of the newsfeed became sort of dull because people didn't want to send messages to everybody. And so Facebook, what happens when that happens? There were stories that said Facebook is dead. Everyone remembers these stories. The end of Facebook. Facebook is dead. Goodbye Facebook. It's MySpace and all that stuff. And it would have been the case if they didn't try to reinvent themselves again and transform. And that's what this move to stories is. It's part of a much broader, Facebook has called it a pivot to privacy, which is ridiculous because it's not a pivot to privacy. It's a pivot to more intimate networks that solve that broadcast problem. So if you look at stories in a vacuum, it's strange. But if you look at stories as part of Facebook's move to messaging in groups, it makes complete sense. So in the newsfeed now is much more dominated by groups than it was in the past. And the nice thing about that is you don't feel like you're on a stage. You're actually speaking with an intimate group of like-minded people, or not like-minded, but people interested in a like interest. And so posting doesn't feel weird. So the newsfeed is vibrant that way. And what stories? Stories actually is a messaging feature, right? So anyone who's familiar with the history of stories with Snapchat, Snapchat built stories because they were looking for a way to do a send all function for snaps. And they didn't want to put send all. So instead they said, well, what if you just hit story and then it appears as this bubble, or I forgot exactly what the UI is on Snapchat because I deleted it. But it appears as this bubble and then all your friends can see it. That was the origination of stories. And then what happens when you click on a story, it's all built for you to engage on messaging, right? So this is actually something that's made between that and so stories are making the newsfeed and Instagram much more conversational, back and forth between friends. And this emphasis on messaging with WhatsApp and Messenger is also a part of this transformation from big broadcast network to intimate network. That takes a lot of work, right? So it's not like the shiny walk on stage and show you the iPhone for the first time type of invention, but it is something that is really underrated in companies. Most companies just say, okay, we have this asset, we're going to just milk it until we can't get any more money out of it. But the tech giants are successful because their mentality is we're going to reinvent, and they've built the culture to do that reinvention, right? And so and that's what I think this is all part of.
Yeah, the mobile story, the mobile app, the reinvention around mobile was a great example of that.
So I'm actually wondering, do you think Mark was weird about answering that question? Because a lot of their innovation over the past couple of years has been from acquisitions. Like if you look at Instagram and then obviously Oculus, WhatsApp, I mean, none of that stuff they built in-house. So do you think that Mark maybe thinks that even if they don't invent, they have enough cash on hand to make some acquisitions?
Yeah. And by the way, if anyone has questions, this is a good time to put them in the chat because we'll get to questions right after this. let's see. So the question is acquisition.
Can they just like acquire their way
Yeah.
to innovation, you know?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
getting defensive, I guess, about it.
Yeah, that's part. It might be part of it. But you know, it's interesting because also M&A is so fraught, right? Most M&A fails, so you can't really have an M&A strategy. And Facebook's actually been, you know, it's funny, despite this view of Zuckerberg as this guy who, you know, domineers all the product managers or all the CEOs that end up showing up in the company. It's been an incredibly successful acquirer. WhatsApp and Instagram, two good examples. Oculus is another. Um, so yeah, and I think that requires two things. One is a founder that is willing to let the CEOs that come in like have a little bit of autonomy. But
For
the
a
other thing,
while.
for a while. But I don't think that's the whole game. And to me, it's that these products need to be able to adapt as well, right? And I think that's something that the founders might not see because it's rare for a company CEO to want to acquire and say, okay, now to sell and say, now I'm ready to change to bring this into the next. Usually they get kind of precious about the thing that they built. But if anything shows us, you know, history shows us anything, it's that's not going to be the thing that's going to take you, you know, to the promised land.
All right. Should we kick it over to Hal? He's very prepared as per usual weeks. So
Yes.
we'll kick it over to Hal.
Good job, Hal. All right,
What's
hold
up,
on
Hal?
one second.
Hal, what is that background?
This is the IU campus. This is Indiana University. So
Nice.
anyone
Very
who comes to Bloomington, if it's the right time of year, you will see
Yeah.
this kind of a look. It's very nice. It's one of the most beautiful campuses in the States.
My wife is an IU grad.
Oh my gosh, that is the coolest thing that I've heard today. My heart just like, it's just beating a
Sorry,
little bit
Alex.
stronger. Just got a little bit warm right here.
Hoosiers.
Let her know IU's doing great. And
Great.
once things are calmed down, she should come see campus again.
Cool. It's a plan.
So Alex, I got a few questions for you. I mean, one is, you know, I mean, thinking about just the engineer's mindset. This is some things we've chatted about recently in the past couple of calls. And thinking about where Facebook stacks up between some other companies. I'm just thinking about how does it really work there? Because one facet of it is being able to talk with other people, talk with your colleagues, and be able to have the best ideas rise to the top. However, at Facebook, we've seen within the past couple of years, a lot of people who are really respected and really experienced leave the company, including Jan Koum, Kevin Systrom, Ken Chanel, all these board members, Erskine Bowles, Reed Hastings, Susan Desmond-Hellmann, Jeffrey Zients, to be replaced on the board, as in this Wall Street Journal article, with people who don't have
that's a good story.
experience on the board. It's a great story. Fantastic. So, I mean, is this really a good example of the engineering mindset is kind of my first question. And my second question would be just kind of wider when you look at, you know, the top 5 companies here, thinking of tech, where does Facebook stack up in being able to have some of these good ideas rise to this top? And what would you do if you were in charge?
Great. So I do think Facebook has a problem listening to outside ideas, and even sometimes that might extend to the board. It's definitely the case. But I do think it's a really good example of the engineer's mindset. You know, one of the things that I spoke with people about when I talked about Zuckerberg, because so again, the engineer's mindset is this willingness and desire to have ideas circulate through the company, come all the way up to decision makers. Very different from the traditional company mindset where, you know, you have to go through all the different ranks in order to bring it up top. And at Facebook, anyone can basically go up to Zuckerberg and say, hey, you know, this is what we should do. In fact, this is kind of what happened inside Facebook during the move to mobile, when somebody inside Facebook went up to Zuckerberg, this guy Cory Andrica, which I detail in the book, went up to him and said, you need to change everything. I could see why there's this perception of Facebook not being someone that's a company that really listens to feedback. I think you have to make a distinction though, right? Because there's listening to feedback and then there's taking every single piece of feedback and acting on it, right? And I do think that Zuckerberg definitely listens. I mean, I've seen it in person and I've heard it from almost everyone that I've spoken with that actually speaks with him. He definitely pays attention, definitely listens. The question is, when does he act on it? And, you know, I think people are probably upset because he, you know, they want him to act on what they're saying and he doesn't, but it doesn't mean he's not listening. So I would say that it's the engineer's mindset still alive and well inside Facebook. It's just that, you know, people have egos, you know, at the end of the day, also, they don't control the company. So that's sort of where they could end up. in a position where they're like, I'm not really sure about Mark listening to people. Listen, yes, act on it. Maybe not always. As far as whereas,
sorry, go ahead.
okay, I'll just say that as far as whereas Facebook, this is a quick one. As far as whereas Facebook stacks up in the hierarchy of tech giants, I mean, I say it straight away in the book, it's the most vulnerable of all of them. It doesn't have its own operating system. It doesn't have any sort of proprietary thing that forces people to keep coming back. It's not, I mean, it's a platform, but it's sort of, it's just, its success is completely based off of like your willingness to type facebook.com into a browser or tap the Facebook app every day. And if people stop doing that, it's toast. There's no other lock-in. So definitely the most vulnerable.
One of the interesting exchanges in the book that I feel like there's probably another chapter to be written about is the exchange where they're talking about the kind of the someone calling out the optimism, right, and saying like, hey, like Facebook's mission is to connect everyone everywhere, but like what if that's not actually good, right? Like, what if we're connecting people that don't deserve to be connected? I think about that literally all the time, not just in the Facebook tense, but like in the internet tense. Like, is its greatest accomplishment also like the worst thing that ever happened to us? So I'm curious, is kind of what you heard from other folks who may have thought that but didn't say it or willing to go on the record about it, and why there wasn't more of that in the chapter.
Yeah, my bureau chief, Matt Honan, wrote a great story about this called Facebook's Reality Hole. And it was like maybe early 2017 when they had been in the middle of all these controversies and just kept talking about how great the world was and stuff like that. And it's like, well, and how important connecting people was. And my bureau chief basically ended by saying, well, what happens when you connect assholes, right? So the one thing about this premise of like whether we should connect people or not is it's sort of moot at this point. Like everyone's connected, and the question is, how can we do this in a way that's sustainable and leads to better outcomes for society than doesn't? And that's why I think bringing in the more adversarial thinkers helps, because when you think connecting is de facto good, as Facebook executives have said, that's when you open yourself up to being exposed to controversy and actually really harming people. But when you say, okay, actually, it's interesting. Facebook is, the internet connects everyone, but Facebook is sort of the fulcrum there, right? Everything piles into this. And if they believe that they have a mission to make it as, positive as possible, a positive experience as possible, even a net positive experience, which I think it can be, then we're in a pretty good spot. But yeah, so you're right. There is probably another book to be written about that. So I will get on the phone with my agent after this and ask him how the book market's doing. Just kidding.
Let me know. All right, I think we've got Ben up next.
We have more questions.
Ben, although I see two Bens, so I'll just unmute both of them and see what happens. Ben, you're on. Or not.
No, one's...
Okay, I'll go since I don't see the other Ben. So my question real quick is about, in the chapter you talked about how Facebook how Mark kind of was convinced that the native app kind of framework for mobile made sense, which in retrospect, like if they hadn't gone native first, mobile first, like their business would have been destroyed. But I'm also thinking like on the flip side, like there must have been kind of like carrots on the native app side that kind of enticed Mark, like we find out about location tracking eventually, and just kind of creepy things that you actually can do better on a native app. So curious if there's anything in your research about that.
Well, I think that's why, I think Zuckerberg is definitely upset that he doesn't own an operating system, although I don't think that's going to come as a big surprise. But at the end of the chapter, like I talk about speaking with him about what Oculus represents, which is an operating system that Facebook could own in virtual reality. And, there was a real emotion that came through from him in that part of the conversation that I haven't seen too often from him. And he basically, he notoriously doesn't like Apple, so he has an Android phone. And he opens up I think he pointed to his phone or opened it up and was like, this is weird. Like, why do we have a operating system where you tap a task first and then a person? Like the way we interact with people is that we select the person and then we pick the task that we want to do with them. And so I think that he wishes that he could architect these operating systems in a way that would make sense for that he could capitalize on. And in fact, Facebook's tried to build a phone for that. And yes, of course, once you can do that, you get the data and everything else. So um, I do think, yeah, Facebook went kicking and screaming into Apple and Google's ecosystems and did whatever he could to prevent being prey to them. And now you see there's this feud between Apple and Facebook. And the reason behind that feud is because um, Apple sees Facebook as a major competitor to iMessage, right? And iMessage is a massive lock-in to Apple products. Once you get on WhatsApp or Messenger, you don't really need an, people that use the iPhone, they're texting, they're using iMessage on the phone, they're using iMessage on the desktop, they get into iMessage groups, and if they leave, they're out. So you can't get another phone. And so now Tim Cook, who's the mortal enemy of Mark Zuckerberg because of this fight, now has control over Mark Zuckerberg through the App Store. Zuckerberg hates that. And not only that, he's slagging him in the press saying we'd never have these privacy issues, using like privacy as this wedge. Meanwhile, Apple isn't exactly an angel in terms of the way that they treat workers and do other things. So, but somehow Tim Cook gets away with this whole, like, he's the CEO who cares about everybody. So I honestly, like, I saw a tiny bit of that in my conversation with Zuckerberg. I'd love to be on the fly on the wall, and maybe in one of those Sweet Baby Ray barbecues, just hearing how Zuckerberg talks to his tech buddies about how much he hates Apple, because goodness, that conversation must be, I'd love to leak that at some point. So
does he hate them because he's jealous of the power, or like, where does that come from? Or did they meet at some like Davos or something and like Tim snubbed him?
Oh, I don't think it's a personality thing. I think
Yeah.
he hates it because Apple literally has their hands around
Yeah.
his
Okay.
company's neck, and it squeezes at certain different pressures every now and again.
Sure. All right, cool. S. Daniel is next. So we'll go ahead and unmute.
Thanks for the question, Ben.
I'm clicking stuff. It's not working.
Yeah, I mean, so
Okay, great.
yeah, so I don't really have like, the only question I have is, isn't Facebook not diversifying from being just a application that you have to type in your phone or click the icon on your phone or type in on web, to becoming more of a deeper player by investing like around 10% in a conglomerate like Reliance? And that goes to the point of somebody said earlier how a significant portion of Facebook's growth has been through the acquisition of Oculus and a variety of these applications, Instagram, WhatsApp, and whatnot. But instead of not just acquiring applications, they're trying to do infrastructure with Reliance and Jio, right? What was your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's, for Facebook, I mean, are you guys all there? I don't know. I seem to have lost it. Okay, so for Facebook, I see what happened. Just got pushed onto another window. I agree with you. I think that they're doing that. I mean, Geo to me seems to be a play for them to sort of be able to get back in the good graces of the Indian public after the huge free basics mess up, and find a way to get their users, because they see them as a main market. Infrastructure to me is a big part of that. But I'm curious what you think. Like, what do you think the reason is why Facebook is making these moves?
Okay, so I think why I thought about that is because you were talking about, you said how Facebook might appear to be toast if it's enough people don't type in that Facebook into their thing or thing. So I think if Facebook is also like leaders at thinking that way at Facebook, they would need to become more embedded like a telecom operator, right? That's why if you buy a Reliance and you have like almost 10% of that company, you have infrastructure type services that people continue to use, and you could always somehow monetize regardless of your top layer applications potentially dying. But I mean, Facebook just continues to buy top layer apps, and now they're branching out into the infrastructure level. So that's why I'm like, they seem to be diversified on both fronts.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Zuckerberg once said that someone asked him, "Do you think Facebook is cool?" And he's like, "I don't want Facebook to be cool. I want it to be like electricity," meaning that like
Right.
it's just this thing that sort of flows in the background and you use it. So yeah, getting into that type of business is one way it could do. It could do that. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts about the question that we asked in the beginning about feedback, and are there interesting applications of feedback in your organizations? Are there ways that you think feedback could be used differently than the way Facebook does it? Does anyone want to chime in on that?
Well, people are thinking
Yeah.
about that because I think we might
It's
see it
tough.
in the comments.
Yeah.
I do have one question actually in
Mhm.
addition. So AI came up again in this chapter, and I haven't read ahead. I've been trying to keep the pace that we've set here with the weekly chapter.
Yeah.
But it's already come up, like it's come up in 2 consecutive chapters, right? The notion that AI is here. It is enabling people to get more done and empowering them to be more like creative and inventive. And I'm curious, like, because you've got other people who are kind of in the tech world, like an Andrew Yang, for example, who's
Mhm.
yes, he like thinks like AI is pretty amazing, but it's also coming for jobs. Like there's going to be a massive shift, and when you look inside of a technology centric company, that is true. But is this yet another example of kind of maybe too much of a like a Pollyannish attitude about what AI can do for kind of like the people who are inside of a technology company?
Mhm.
And this is assuming that not every company will be a technology company going forward necessarily. But is that, should people be worried, especially at a time when they're losing their jobs, that AI is only going to make that problem worse?
Yeah, I think we should worry. And I think we should worry because our political establishment and our education system haven't done a good job preparing us for this world. I mean, education really is the beginning of this. In the last chapter, we'll talk about it then, but I go back to Cornell and I asked one of the professors there, how should we handle this automation thing? And he's like, no, don't worry about the automation. It's the education. If we have a system that incentivizes memorization and spit back, and we have a system that is intent on if we have a system that's intent on having people strive for A's and not being able to take risks, then when they get into the workforce and AI comes, they're done because AI is really good at being proficient at things and memorizing and spit back. So we have to change the education system. We should change the political system, I think, to give people a much better chance of succeeding if they do lose their job because of AI, because it will happen. I mean, I was at this automation conference that I described in the first chapter, and one of the people that I was there with was that I met with there was from a major bank, and he's like, "Yeah, we're all about FTE reduction, full-time employee reduction, right?" And so I think that that we need the private sector to pitch in here and find ways to retrain people, but it's also going to happen on the public sector as well. And that's why I was so surprised by Andrew Yang's perspective. He's a guy that seems to get AI very well, and his plank was it's hopeless. Let's pay people money because of it. When we haven't really seen any significant job losses because of AI yet. I mean, we obviously have much other important factors. Like if for Yang, who's a person who really understands this, I didn't see any real education plank to his platform. So I think that that's really where it should go. Yeah,
It's
and
interesting. Like,
when
do you
yeah,
contrast that with a guy like Steven Schwartzman, who's on
yeah,
a different like end of an ideological spectrum? Well, maybe not completely different, but
mhm,
he talks about AI like just as much. But he's very much an education guy on this, like so
mhm,
much as like putting his name on a university as he is wont to do
mhm,
in China
mhm.
to teach people about this.
Yeah, and it's not just learning about AI, but it's just teaching people a way of thinking that's going to be able to, give them the ability to navigate this world better. So, Mark Cuban says he's going to run for is thinking about running for president now. I don't know if it's a great idea for him to run right now. Just kind of let these two guys duke it out, but release your platform, man. Like let's see, because he understands AI. I mean, as you guys know, he's in the book, and he read the book and gave me feedback on it. So he was just on Kara Swisher's podcast talking about how AI is going to be something that big and small companies are going to deal with. I'd really like to see his political proposals in terms of how we're going to handle this.
So cool. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say Keith had a really good piece of feedback. Keith, do you want to share?
Sure. What I said was that Facebook's model for feedback, I think, is ideal. In fact, I use it as many of the other instructors that work with me do whenever we're teaching motorcycle, because that's a really good thing to get some feedback on how the student's doing. But I think Alex alluded to the real issue behind the model, and that is that listening is not the same as evaluating or acting on. And I think that's where a lot of business models fall down. I work professionally, my career is with the government. And the feedback model that we see is actually, it's always in our face. They're asking for feedback on pretty much everything. HR is always asking for feedback on stuff. Management's always asking for feedback on stuff. But of course, being the government, the cogs turn so slow that I think by the time they actually read the information and possibly even evaluate and act on it, I'll probably be retired. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. The act part, I mean, it's funny, like people talk about these systems and they're like, well, how do these systems, how do these systems decide when to do things? And it's like, at the end of the day, these are judgment calls. And these systems are really good at getting us to judgment quickly, which is important in a fast moving world. And actually getting ideas to judgment in the first place. But at the end of the day, judgment is judgment. And I don't really think you can use a system or a machine to be able to supplant that. It's going to be judgment at the end of the day. And so people won't like those calls.
Yeah, and I'll share, from our company, I work for a large company, and when it comes to feedback, I mean, we were all reading Radical Candor when that was like in vogue, right? Late last year. And why that was important for us was because we kind of sat in the corner of ruinous empathy, right? You're so worried about hurting someone's feelings that you end up not giving them direct feedback. So it's interesting to read the Facebook chapter and like how they structure the feedback, because it's like, hey, everyone's going to give direct feedback. It's just like, how do you give it in a way that, I think gets the point across and then actually gets something done. So I thought it was like at least like one step beyond like just being direct, but not being an asshole.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting just being able to sit in and talk about it and speak to people about how it's actually works once you leave that class. To me was super interesting, and how it does, like, because this is one thing that, as a reporter, your instinct is to fact check, right? When a company tells you they do feedback good, you're like, they're lying to me. So, but yeah, I did speak to a lot of people and be like, hey, is the feedback thing in Facebook real? And universally, they're like, oh yeah, it's real. We do it. So
did you see it across the other companies as well, or was was it only prevalent at Facebook, or was it prevalent everywhere and Facebook was just the best at it?
I think it's most prevalent at Facebook. I think everywhere it is sort of a component of the engineer's mindset, which is at these companies make it easy to share ideas, across divisions, across levels. But Facebook has it the most institutionalized. But I think implementing it can really make a change. And we'll see it when we get to the Microsoft week, that when Microsoft started to implement feedback inside the company, that helped it turn around. So it exists across the board, but Facebook is definitely the best at it.
In the employee feedback, because you touched on kind of how they were evaluating employees, not just with like a formula, but also always seeing it through a lens of growth. I didn't have a chance to like dig into the earnings call today, but I saw a couple of like there were some pieces of good news regarding growth, which is again like at a point where like just when you think they can't get any bigger, they keep getting bigger. Are those two things? I mean, it might be obvious, but like, are those two things correlated, right? Like, are they, is there holding employees to account for growth? Is that the thing that's driving the growth? Is that where the culture and the company output, is that where they meet?
Yeah. So I actually think Facebook's pursuit of growth is actually a big problem. And maybe we can drop this link that to a story that I wrote into the meeting invite so people can read about it. And if they have any thoughts about it next week. To me, the main weakness inside Facebook's culture has just been this maniacal pursuit of growth, and to the point where they have put it into the evaluation. And that to me sort of stands in contrast to their decision to bake feedback into the culture, because the feedback is all about circulating good ideas, making sure the best ideas get to come to life. And the growth thing is just like, it's a terribly misplaced incentive. It doesn't really incentivize the best ideas. It incentivizes hitting a metric. And that's where the Facebook employees really get into trouble, is when they start to cut corners just to meet that metric.
Cool. I think we have time for maybe one last question. Spencer just got in under the wire here. So Spencer, you're up.
There we go. Sorry. Quick question about content creators, media companies on the Facebook platform. Curious to get your thoughts. Did you get into that in some of your conversations? How does Facebook think about media businesses? Historically, media businesses have made big investments on the platform, and then the algorithm changes, or different things happen to their content out of their control. They're on Facebook's platform after all. And so I'm curious, do they value media content creators on the platform, and how do you think they're thinking about that now?
Ooh, that's the $1 million question about Facebook. And by million, I mean probably $1 billion question when you come to Facebook. So Shira Ovida had a great column, right, that she wrote in the New York Times, I think it was this week, talking about how Facebook doesn't really value anything. They just tend to build products around human behaviors. And I think there's some real truth to that. And so when they saw people were interested in watching videos or taking videos on their phone, Zuckerberg says video is going to be the future. And then sort of the media companies become the guinea pigs to try to fill that, optimization inside the newsfeed algorithm to show you more stuff. And now when he started to see people were, sharing less on the broadcast feed, then all of a sudden it becomes these intimate sharing is more important. So I think that if you're a company doing business with Facebook, there's, any media company, brands, right? They know the same thing. There's a warning tape that comes before you cross the line and go into the door of Facebook, which is, at your own risk, because the company is fairly ruthless. And once it sees a behavior change, it's done. So there have been big media companies that have built up entirely based off of Facebook traffic, don't exist anymore because Zuckerberg changed his mind about something. So I don't know. It's a real fraught relationship with that company for anyone who's dealing with it.
Yeah, it's their platform at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good question. It's amazing. It's also interesting to see all these publishers go back into partnership with Facebook and start building more divisions that are based off of Facebook money. And it's just like, man, like with the people that you're hiring people, you probably don't tell them how tenuous it is. And then Facebook pulls the carpet out of it. I mean, Twitter just did that to BuzzFeed with our morning show, where Twitter's like, we're not going to fund it anymore. Morning show's gone. So I would really love it if the tech platforms stopped doing this to media companies, because it traumatizes the people who want to tell good stories, want to make a difference in the media business, and then they keep having the rug pulled from under them.
Doesn't this also allow for the rise of unestablished news sources then? If they're kicking out legitimate media partners, I mean, someone's going to fill the space, right?
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, but I think the biggest problem is less that they're kicking out good media companies and starting to pay bad ones, is that they still have that share button. I mean, to me, it's as simple as a share button, because when you're able to share things without a second thought, you end up being more likely to share misinformation, sensationalized news that sparks emotion versus news that's thoughtful. And the button takes out all hesitation that you would have otherwise. So when you don't have that button, you actually have to copy and paste a link and put it in your, compose window and say, do I want to share this? And when you look in the window and it says Hillary Clinton is a space alien who hides children in the basement of a pizza store and abuses them, it's much more easy to hit the share button than actually have to go put your name on it and say, okay, yeah, this is me. So.
All right, so we're at time. So what, if we are tracking along, I think next week it's all about Google. So anything, Alex, you want to share about Google as we're diving into that chapter?
Yeah, I think the Google discussion is going to be a lot of fun because a lot of the tools that Google use, like we talked about AI a lot up until this point, which may be accessible in some organizations and will definitely be accessible in many organizations soon. Google is interesting because it's run almost entirely off of Google tools, Gmail, Docs, Sheets, and what's the last one? Slides. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of applicability, in terms of people's day-to-day work. It's less of the workplace of the future, and it's more like the workplace of today. And there are tweaks that people can make, with the technology that they're using already. So that will be interesting. And the chapter also gets into Google's political strife internally and the building of the Google Assistant. So there'll be plenty of things to talk about. And by the way, I just want to say that the bar of questions in this group is unbelievable. I'm getting asked tougher questions here than I'm getting asked anywhere else, which is great. I mean, I really feel like people are bringing it, which is awesome. So I appreciate everyone's questions and those that are following along silently. So thank you.
I mean, this is the way to read a book, man.
That's right. Yeah,
this is amazing.
Awesome.
I told you, like when we did this, I mean, this is
Yeah.
like totally selfish because I want to read this book this way. So thank you for doing this yet again. And we'll see everybody next week.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and go celebrate your birthday, Ian.
Thank you. My kids are outside my door.
Birthday.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.